So we'll continue inshallah from where we left off just before Salah. We'll go maybe till 9:20, 25, and hopefully get through a little bit more. So we talked about, perfect, is it working? Is my, all right, so it's working. So we talked about what so your job in all of this is, because this metin or this text is a little bit more complicated than if you did Abu Shuja with me. If you didn't, then you have nothing to compare to, so you'll be happy and you'll be fine. But if you do have something to compare to, then you'll know the difference. Abu Shuja's metin is much more concise and easier to follow. This one's a little bit more complicated. So you have to go back and kind of write down, make your own notes of what the obligatory actions for wudu are, what the invalidators are, what the sunan are. Make sure you have basic ideas. And for example, what obligates a purificatory ghusl, a wash? Like what obligates a ghusl or a shower? Make sure you know them and make sure that they're clear to you and you understand them. And if they're not, then we can always talk about them again. But you just have to go back and kind of read them again to make sure that you have clarity. He doesn't have things like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. He just kind of puts them all together and makes it a little bit more difficult. Yeah, go ahead. So you can, because anything that has soap or anything that has water because it's water with an additional purifying agent. So because this didn't exist when these mutun were written, in Islam, what removes najasa? One thing. What removes najasa? Water, right? It removes everything, right? Nothing else aside from purifying water, which is why we kind of studied that. So the existence of substances that would additionally help water remove najasa did not exist. So today with soap and chloride and stuff like that, you can consider it as if it's purifying water, because it's water with purifying agents within it. And because this didn't exist before, they didn't talk about it. But now that we have this issue here, so it's like if you go into a swimming pool and there's a lot of chlorine in it. So what now? Is this water? Of course, because this agent that's been added, it's not an agent that's going to change water. It's an agent that is there to purify the water more from anything that could be in it that is harmful, which back when these mutun were written was not something that they necessarily knew about or knew what it was. Like they didn't have this a substance that they could say, adding this to water makes water even more purifying. No, it's like anything, we don't know. These are pure substances. We don't know when you add them to water what's happening, so they're not purifying. So now that we know 1, 2, 3, 4, you add them to water, water becomes more purifying than if you're making wudu with water that has soap or water that has chlorine or something in it. So any agent that is purifying, even though this water may not be something you can drink, you can still use it for wudu. Because technically speaking, you can't drink salt water, but you can still make wudu in it. So there's qiyas there. Does that answer your question, inshallah? Okay, yeah. All right, so وَمَنْ لَزِمَهُ الْغُسْلُ حَرُمَ عَلَيْهِ قِرَاءَةُ الْقُرْآنِ. It is unlawful for anyone obligated to make a purificatory bath to recite the Quran. And I think I talked about this here. Did I? No, I didn't talk about this here, but that's fine. Oh, this is so slow. Why is this so slow? Okay, so here's the point that I think is it. So they differentiate between someone who has janaba and someone who has a menstruating lady or someone who's postpartum, right? Because janaba you can get rid of, but menstruation and postpartum you can't. So this argument was introduced maybe 150 years ago, and that's why a lot of these old, more recent texts have these adjustments to them in terms of the piece of information. So they say, so Imam Malik, for example, and one of the opinions of the Shafi'i school, which is also the opinion of Imam al-Muzani in the Shafi'i school, and one of the opinions of narrated from Imam Ahmad. So one of the opinions of the madhab of Hanbali. Again, what we're studying is the prominent opinions of the Hanbali madhab, not all the opinions of the Hanbali, but just the prominent, which is the same thing that Abu Shuja does in his Shafi'i text. We're studying the prominent position, but I will give you the non-prominent positions when I think it's helpful. And the majority of modern day scholars is that it's permissible for menstruating and postpartum ladies to recite the Quran, but it's not permissible for someone who has janaba. So if someone who had intercourse, they're not to read the Quran until they go and have a ghusl. They should not read the Quran يعني hands down, this is a clear يعني تحريم. ويعبر المسجد لحاجة ولا يلبث فيه بغير وضوء. So someone who must make the purificatory bath, someone who has janaba, can pass through a mosque if there is a need to do so, and according to the sound opinion, without need. But he cannot remain therein without ablution. If he does make ablution, it's permissible for him to stay. Someone drunk, insane, or sold with transferable impurity is barred from entering or remaining in the mosque altogether. Now, this is where Imam al-Hajjawi goes against the prominent position a little bit, and I'll just point this out for you. It's insane, wallahi. So the Hanbalis and Shafi'is see it to be permissible for someone who has a major ritual impurity to pass through the masjid without need. The Hanafis and Malikis see it to be impermissible. So the earlier two schools, they don't. If you have a major ritual impurity, they don't see the existence in the masjid to be permissible. For someone who has janaba, whether it's a ritual impurity that can be removed with ghusl, or a ritual impurity that cannot be removed, like menstruation and postpartum, that they shouldn't be in the masjid during that time. The Shafi'is and the Hanbalis see it to be permissible to pass through if your major ritual impurity can be removed, but you're not to stay. And for menstruating ladies and postpartum ladies, they see that they can stay in the masjid, even though it may not be recommended to do so, or within a lot of details that we'll probably talk about in a different section of this when we talk about. Yes, the second alayhi ghusl. That gonna work out? It worked out. Okay. ومن غسل ميتا أو أفاق من جنون أو إغماء بلا حلم سن له الغسل. So when it's recommended to perform, this is a recommendation. This is not obligatory. So it's obligatory if you wash a deceased to make wudu. It's sunnah. It's recommended to perform the purificatory bath if he has washed a dead body. So if you wash a deceased, it's recommended to make ghusl. It's obligatory to make wudu. So if you don't make ghusl, at least you have to make wudu for sure. Regained his sanity. Someone who had ighma, and this is not fainting as in you lost consciousness. This is as in having a seizure, right? So this is someone who lost his sanity, not lost his consciousness. Or regained consciousness without having ejaculated during that period. It is sunnah to do that. Like if someone lost their consciousness and didn't have an ejaculation within that period of time, it's sunnah to make ghusl. You don't have to. You have to make wudu, but you don't have to make ghusl. It's sunnah. So this is sunnah lahul ghusl. So it's recommended. And regain sanity. So if someone regained sanity, if someone had a seizure, or someone went into a psychotic episode, then it's sunnah for them to have ghusl after that as well. Those are the 3 times where it's sunnah to have ghusl. There's a lot of other. I think he talks about them here. He may not. I don't think he does. So there are al-ghusulat al-masnuna. There's a lot of ghusl that is sunnah. So it's not just after you wash a deceased or regain consciousness or regain sanity. It's also before Jumu'ah, and it's also before Salat al-Eid, Salat al-Eidain, right? And it's also, some scholars say, before Salat al-Istisqa or Salat al-Kusuf, or before Salat al-Khusuf, or before a marriage. So these are all times where it's sunnah for you to have ghusl. And the Shafi'iyya count 17 ghusulat masnuna. And the Hanabil have a similar number. It's just not talked about within this primary text. You find it in the more tertiary or secondary text. So he points out here how to do it. والغسل الكامل أن ينوي ثم يسمي ويغسل يديه 3 ويتوضأ ويحفي على رأسه 3 ترويه ويعم بدنه غسلا 3 ويدلكه ويتيامن ويغسل قدميه مكانا آخر. So a complete purificatory bath or a complete ghusl is comprised of in the following order. So making the intention, saying Bismillah, washing the hands 3 times and washing any impure areas, making ablution, making wudu, pouring water on the head 3 times, ensuring that it wets through, meaning wetting the base of the hair so that the water gets down to the base of the hair if possible. If there's a lot of thick hair, it may be difficult, and that's fine. But if it's not too thick, then you should be trying to get to the bases of the hair. And it's not sufficient just to wipe it, so it's not sufficient within a ghusl for you just to be wiping your head. You should try and get the water into the bases of all of your hair. Rubbing the body, starting with the right side, and washing the feet a 2nd time in a different location, if necessary, to ensure that there is no filth on the bottoms of the feet. So this is what he thinks as a perfect ghusl. All right, so because you're probably wondering, well, this is the perfect way to do it. This is how he thinks we should be doing it at all times. So again, you go back and kind of read it, so make sure you have clarity on it. You make the intention, you say Bismillah, you wash the hand 3 times in any impure areas. If there's anything that's filthy, especially the genitalia, under the armpits, all of the orifices where they have a lot of impurities, try to wash them. And then you make a wudu, a proper wudu. Then you pour water on your head 3 times and make sure you start with the head and make sure you go right down to the roots of the hair. And then you pour water upon all of your body 3 times and you rub from the right to the left all parts that can be, including the soles of the feet. But what is needed? So he says, وَالْمُجْزِئُ أَنْ يَنْوِيَ وَيُسَمِّي وَيَعُمُّ بَدَنَهُ بِالْغُسْلِ مَرَّةً. What is adequate, so what's obligatory for a ghusl to work, meaning for the ghusl to count, all that is needed is that you have the intention, وَيُسَمِّي and say Bismillah, and this shouldn't be surprising to you because this is not the first time the Hanabila have pointed out that saying Bismillah is wajib, right? If you followed along, this is the 2nd or 3rd time where the Hanabila see saying Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim before wudu and before certain things to be wajib. Again, in their terminology, it's more of a highly recommended one, not as something, if you fail to do it, it doesn't count. So just take the saying of Bismillah here with a grain of salt in terms of its obligation. It's more of a high recommendation. But the intention for sure is there. So if someone, again, and I'll finish up, and washes the entire body once. So what's obligatory for a ghusl is the intention and water coming upon the entirety of the body, right? From head to toe, all the other details are just sunan. Now, if you jump into a swimming pool and come out the other side, does that suffice as a ghusl? Huh? What? Yeah, so the condition is if there was a niyyah. So if you stood and you had the niyyah of ghusl and you jumped into the water and you came out the other side, then that suffices because the water now has covered the entirety of the body and you make an intention, so you're good. If you didn't have an intention, if you spend all day long in the swimming pool and you walked out and you never intended for a ghusl, you have to make ghusl when you go home. Like you have major ritual impurity. Like you still have to perform a ghusl. So remember that when we talk about these rituals, a part of it is the technical, mechanical things that make sense and we have to do. And then there are the spiritual piece that without intentions, nothing matters. If you stood there, someone made all the actions of wudu with no intention of making wudu, it doesn't count. You have to have the intention of making wudu. Like you have to know that you're making wudu. Like this is what you're doing. And the point of this is you're going to make salah afterwards. You don't have to say anything. It doesn't have to be, I'm going to make wudu. It's just you know what you're doing, right? So if someone's swimming without the intention of ghusl at any point, right, then it doesn't count. But if at any point they're in the water and they make the intention, I'm intending this to be a ghusl as well, and they dunk their head under the water, khalas, they're good. This suffices. So intentions are very important when it comes to Islamic rituals, like very important. Without them, nothing really counts. It's important to understand them. And I'm going to say this almost within each and every session, just as a reminder. Why are we doing this? So the reason that you learn a madhab is that so you have a default. You have to have a default in your worship. You have to have something that you worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through in terms of your rituals, your basics, the tahara, salah, siyam, zakah, hajj, and basic mu'amalat. You have to have a default. If you have a default, then you have a way to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That is based on the opinion of 100,000 Muslim scholars over history. Because before madhab, each madhab has 100,000 Muslim scholars at least. So they've looked into all the evidence and they broke it down and they've argued it back and forth and they're happy with the conclusions that they've made within the rituals. So you just choose a madhab and you worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through this madhab. Now, if you run into something that's very difficult, meaning if there's an opinion in your madhab that is extremely hard for you to hold on to based on for reasons of your profession or for reasons of where you're living or when you're living, then you're allowed to leave your madhab to the opinion of another one based on knowledge. Meaning you go back and you listen to the arguments that exist back and forth for this issue, for this topic. And if the opposite opinion has good merit and you think it makes sense, then you can leave the opinion of your madhab to another one. And it doesn't matter what madhab you hold on to. There's always going to be one or two issues that are going to cause you. So the perfect doesn't exist. It's always going to be one or two that cause you some form of difficulty or some degree of difficulty. You can leave the opinion of your madhab to another one based on knowledge, not based on whim. And you have to go back and look at things. But you should have a default of how to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So if you study with me the Fiqh Hanbali, then learn and then worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Perform your wudu as he explained here and just continue. And if for some reason one of these things are difficult, you can't do them within your day for whatever reason, then you can go and you can look outside the madhab for a different opinion. This does not give you the ability to give fatwa. Nor does it give you the ability to correct people. It gives you the ability to perform rituals appropriately for yourself. And if someone doesn't know what to do, you can say, well, based on the Hanbali madhab, and this is what I follow, this is how you do it. And if you'd like to join me, then you can do it this way and you're safe. Right? Doing it this way, you're safe. But well, I did it this way, is it safe? If you don't know, I don't know. Don't say it's not, because it's not exactly what you studied in this matan, or maybe in the Shafi'i matan. In order for you to answer that question, you have to have studied all four, and you have to have depth in the details of the opinions of all four, especially when you're dealing with laymen and people who don't really understand much about Islam, and they don't really follow anything specifically, and they don't know what they're. So that's the job. That's our job. Like, I'm supposed to help them, and I'm supposed to also explain to them that you have to come and learn. You have to come and learn. You have to pick up a madhab and learn. It takes you maybe 4 months. Once a week, you attend something, you learn, you have the basics of how to make wudu, the basics of how to pray. Now you're safe. You can do these things when you're in a position. You know waters, and you know what to do if you don't have a lot of water, and what's permissible and what's not. So this is important for people to learn. But that's why you're learning here. So don't, just make sure you understand exactly what it is that we're teaching, and don't misuse these topics. Like, don't end up taking this information and then projecting upon people without understanding maybe what their backgrounds are, and the fact that there may be more opinions out there than what you're aware of specifically. This is for you and for your practice, and maybe to teach your children how to practice Islam appropriately. Have a madhab, you have a default, you're safe, you're following the opinion of Imam Ahmad and all the scholars that came after him. Like you said, like I'm telling you, like right now, Imam Hajjawi, who wrote this matan, the one who explained it is Imam al-Buhuti, and they all take from the Imam Ahmad. These are the three people that we're using in this simple study. There's thousands of more scholars who have looked into these opinions, and they've seen them to be sound within each madhab. So that's why we're trying to learn this stuff, and this is why just keep that in mind. And we respect, you'll find out that we pray here based on this madhab. Like the salah, the imamah here is Hanbali, hands down. Like if you've studied Shafi'i with me, then you know that we're not praying according to the Shafi'i madhab at all. I don't say Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim out loud. I don't give you time after Bismillah to actually read Surah Al-Fatiha. There's a lot of things that we don't do. We pray mostly based on the Hanbali madhab with some variation outside of that. And the reason that we do that, we look for a way that's more easy. It's easier for people to follow along. Something that makes it more easy for the congregants to deal with. But we can do it one day. We can just pray, like here's how the Hanafis would pray a full salah, and here's how Malikis how would pray a full salah. And you'll find there's all these little variations and differences. For the majority of masajid, we pray. Anyone know why we pray? Most masajid pray like based on the Hanbali madhab. Anyone know? It's a really silly reason. Want to take a guess? Why is it that most masajid pray like the way we're praying here? The way I lead is mostly Hanbali, mostly. Like the majority of the reasons are Hanbali. It's not just this masjid. Yeah, haram, right? Haram, because the haram, if it's Saudiya, they follow the Hanbali madhab, and that's what people watch all the time on TV. So if I go ahead and don't do what the haram does, people are going to come and kill me or shoot me or call me deviant or something. They don't understand that if I took you to Libya and you stand behind the imam who recites the whole time with his hands down, and they don't and their rafa' from ruku' is less than less than a second and a half. This is how they pray in the Hanafi school. They don't say Ameen after you go to a masjid in Turkey and the imam says well dallin, you say Ameen, you'll be the only person screaming out loud. People look at you after the salah like you're insane. So these are just madhab, how people, and all of them are valid, all of them are correct. What happens in the haram currently, which was not the case, the haram was not Hanbali for the longest time, was not. For the longest time, it was not. The haram for the longest time were Shafi'iyya, they were Malikiyya for a while after that, but they were not Hanabil until very, very, very recently. The Hanbali madhab, Imam Ahmad lived in Kufa. He was in Iraq all his life. His madhab was in that part of the world. Imam Malik, his madhab was within Hijaz. Like Imam Malik lived in Medina, and his madhab made it to Mecca. And Imam Shafi'i, in his initial madhab, was in Mecca, and that's what the fatwa was based upon. Then he went to Egypt after that and continued for this, with the Jadid, but they continued to follow his initial opinion. So only recently did the Hanbali madhab become the prominent within Saudi Arabia. Again, this is the history of the madhab's movement, and it's not what I'm trying to teach here, but it's just interesting to understand that most what people are comfortable with. They're comfortable with what for the haram. When they go for Hajj or Umrah, what they watch on TV, that's what they're comfortable with that. And I don't blame them. That's totally fine. That's why I like to continue. There's no reason for us to break that for them or make it difficult, especially most Muslims who are not well educated. When you do something different, you'll just make them feel very uncomfortable, and they don't know how to answer that, and they think that you're deviant. And the reason or the reality is that they just don't know anything about their own deen, and we're trying to teach them not to make them feel uncomfortable. Yeah. No. Yeah. So the idea is that you follow a madhab and you stick to it within your own salah. Whatever the imam is doing is what the imam is doing. You stick to your madhab. If the imam does not allow you to practice your madhab because he's not giving you enough time or there's not enough space, then the imam carries that. So the whole point of having an imam is that imam carries the salah. So even if you're not allowed to do something specific, like for example, if you're a Shafi'i and you want to recite Surah Al-Fatiha after the imam, and I don't give you enough time, even in the Shafi'i madhab, you're not obligated to recite. You just start, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, alhamdulillah. I start reading, you be quiet, and I carry that for you. I mean, it's my obligation, it's not yours. So the imam will always carry it for you. So you try to continue to recite, or you pray the way you were taught to pray, the way that the madhab, but you have to make sure you've learned. Don't tell me what we do in our countries. What people do in their countries has nothing to do with the actual madhab. So what I'm trying to tell people to do is learn. Take one text, just one text, a primary text in a madhab, read it so you know what your madhab actually is, because most people don't. They just, they come from Syria or Palestine or Sudan or Iraq or Sham, or Misr, and well, that's how we pray there. And we're this. Yeah, you're that, but that doesn't necessarily mean that's how this madhab does things. You still have to go back and read. So that's my advice. But yeah, you can continue. You do what is comfortable to you as a ma'moom, but the imam can carry the whole issue for you, inshallah ta'ala. When it comes to Surah Al-Fatiha, for example, that's totally acceptable. All right. So that was just like a little, and I'll repeat this every 2 or 3 lessons to make sure if you're attending this, understanding what the purpose of us teaching this is. Because if you learn something and then you go misuse it, then I've harmed you. If I taught you something and then it causes you to go and fight with people, or it causes you to go point out other people to be wrong and to argue, and that I didn't help you. I'm teaching this for you, so you can practice appropriately and teach your kids, inshallah ta'ala. But there are different opinions, which is why I put them out to you. So other people may follow different opinions, and that's totally fine. But if someone's standing there and they have no idea what to do, ta'ala, you can tell ta'ala, based on the Hanbali madhab, and I understand the basics of it, I'll tell you how to make wudu appropriately, and you can teach it to them. And make sure you're very clear that this is what the Hanbali madhab does, and that's okay. Because the Prophet ﷺ did different things, and he made sure that the door was open wide enough for there to be different interpretations. So we had these different schools of jurisprudence, so Islam could be much easier to practice and follow by people all across the world. Okay. Yeah. Yes, if you're making, so just don't say Bismillah as you're sitting down doing your business. But once you're done that, making wudu or making ghusl, you can say Bismillah, it's fine. We just happen to have our lavatory and the sink in the same area because it's just easier for plumbing. But you just kind of watch out in terms of when you're saying something, but you can say it in the bathroom, it's fine. No, you don't have to say it. It's okay to say it, but you don't have to. But it's okay to say it. All right. ويتوضأ بمد ويغتسل بصاع فإن أسبغ بأقل أو نوى بغسله الحدثين أجزأ ويسن لجنب غسل فرجه والوضوء لأكل نوم ومعادة وطئ. So it is recommended that one make ablution using 1 mud. And I pointed this out to you when we started out. 1 mud is half a liter of water, and the ghusl using 2 liters of water. So that is what you're supposed to learn. So this is how I learned to make wudu. And the same thing goes with Shafi'i madhab. When we learned Abu Shuja, the wudu, we were brought half a liter, which is a large cup of water, or maybe not large, like a medium-sized cup of water. And you're supposed to make wudu with that cup. That's the amount of water that you should be using for your wudu. We are, mashallah, much more. Huh? Yeah, ma'at tathlis. Because you pick up a small amount, and it's more of the washing and the rubbing. It's not just putting the water and let the water run down as we do, which is acceptable and is fine. But this is what the Sahaba did, and this is what the scholars after them did. And if you're doing a ghusl, then you need 2 liters. So think about what's 2 liters of water? It's like a large coat, right? So that's what you're supposed to use for a ghusl. And if you lived in the Middle East for a while and you had I don't miss this part of living in the Middle East. I miss a lot of things. I don't miss the part where you went to the bathroom, you sat down cold on a little stool, and you had in front of you a small bin of water and a little thing, and you had to go like this. I don't miss that piece. It was very demeaning. It was not fun at all. I love my showers. Allah yazihum al-khair for having that running. But that was how I remember when I was 6-year-old. I went back to, my dad sent me from Canada to Syria when I was 5 and around 6. And I didn't speak a word of Arabic. And I entered, and the difference between Richmond Hill, Toronto, and Kafr Hawar was so severe that until this day, I don't eat mulukhiyah. I don't eat it, because even though it's great food, I hate it. When I walked into my uncle's house, the first thing I saw was like a mountain of mulukhiyah, and for like next 3 months, we just sat down picking them. I hated it. And I remember that I wasn't allowed to eat French fries with my fingers. I had to use a 6-year-old. What does a 6-year-old care about? A 6-year-old wants to have French fries with ketchup. They had no ketchup, and you weren't allowed to eat it with your hands. You had to eat it with khubz. with bread, right? I wasn't allowed to do it. And the worst part, all that was fine. The worst part was when I opened the door of the bathroom. Yeah, and when I opened the door of the bathroom, I thought like something was wrong with the bathroom, that they were renovating or something. It was just a hole. Like, where's the bathroom? Yeah, which bathroom? And where's the bathroom? I remember asking my uncle, "Is like this the bathroom, or is this like for the animals?" He got very offended. But I thought it was like for the animals. It looked like something that animals would use, not human beings. And of course, I learned to use it and have baths and all that stuff and showers and whatnot. But subhanAllah, it's a huge. But the learning point here, I think, is very reasonable, which is the small amounts. So half a liter for wudu and 2 liters for ghusl, and it's very environmentally aware as well. So and the Prophet ﷺ would say that don't overuse water, even if you're making wudu ala nahr. Use water with respect, because it's the blessing of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and it's for all of us. I think it's a nice thing to think about and learn from. So it suffices if one can drench everything, meaning that the water flows over the entire body without having to rub it with less than these quantities, or one intends their purificatory bath to lift both major and minor ritual impurity. So you can always make the intention with the ghusl to remove both impurities. Like I said, whatever lifts the major ritual impurity will lift the minor ritual impurity, and that's enough. So you just make that intention, and you don't have to make wudu. Now, if you go back, you see, he points out that that's the perfect way to do a ghusl, that you have a wudu sometime if you go back to but you don't have to. Al-mujzi is just the whole body is washed with water once, and if you had the intention of removing both your major and minor, then that suffices. It is recommended for someone in the state of major ritual impurity, even women, and upon finishing menstruation or postpartum bleeding, to wash the genitals and make ablution before eating, drinking, sleeping, or repeating intercourse. So it's sunnah that after you have janaba, so someone had relations with their wife, before you go back and do it again, for example, or you eat, or you drink, or you do anything, or sleep, even to make wudu. If you're not going to have a ghusl, the sunnah is to make wudu before you do this again. Obviously, it is best to make ghusl, and it's best not to stay in janaba for any period of time if you don't have to. I'm not sure if he talks about here. I don't think he talks about this here, but it's a part of not just this method, but every method. If you're in a state of major ritual impurity, you try and get rid of it as soon as possible. You don't have it linger around for a while. So the moment your lady's finished her hayd or finished her postpartum bleeding, make ghusl as soon as possible. Now you may not, for reasons of pain or bleeding or wounds or something, that's fine. But the moment you can, make ghusl. Again, for spouses, once they have intercourse, as soon as possible. It's best to have ghusl that night before you go to bed. Now, if you don't, it's fine. You're not sinful for not doing that. The sunnah is at least to make wudu. But in our situations with the homes that we have, if you're going to make wudu, you might as well just have the ghusl. You're already out of bed and in the bathroom, so might as well do it. Understanding that back then, it was much more challenging to have a ghusl. Because like I said, like you go to the bathroom, you're sitting down, there's a little bit of water. That water has to be heated. Most of the time, you need a fire to heat that water so you can actually have a ghusl, because you need the water to be of temperature. Sometimes that takes a lot of time, and it's very cold, so you don't do it tonight, you'll do it tomorrow morning, right? And wudu is easier because it's less complicated. But for us, where alhamdulillah, hot water is always available, it's best just to do wudu. So don't stay in a state of major ritual impurity any longer than you need. Right? Any longer than you need, make ghusl as soon as possible. And that's just the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. That's what he taught us. That's what the madhahib all agreed to. All right, let's talk about tayammum. Dry ablution. It legally means to wipe the face and the hands with dirt or with soil. I don't like the word dirt. Never did. I thought it was always a bad translation. With soil, with light soil. So it's not damp soil. It's not mud. It's light soil that has a little bit of airborne particles coming out of it. It is one of the several things specific to the ummah of the Prophet ﷺ. No other nation before us had the concept of tayammum. Allah has not made it a means of purification for any other community or ummah before us. وهو بدل طهارة الماء. Oh, it's 9:35. Okay, let's read this, and then I'll let you go. وهو بدل طهارة الماء إذا دخل وقت فريضة أو أبيحت نافلة وعدم الماء أو زاد على ثمنه كثيرا أو ثمن يعجزه أو خاف باستعماله أو طلبه ضرر بدنه أو رفيقه أو حرمته أو ماله بعطش أو مرض أو هلاك ونحوه شرع التيمم. So here he goes into a few details. It's nice. Actually, this is a nice. So dry ablution is a substitute for purification with water. It's permissible with two preconditions. Number one, the first is that the time for an obligatory act or something one has sworn to do has entered. Forget about what one has sworn to do. This is like more, there's another, if you made like an oath or something, but you can put that aside. If it's time for dhuhr. So it's time for dhuhr, that's the first. So it has to be a time for an obligatory action of some sort, some salah. Or something supererogatory becomes permissible, or even if there's a nafila. So something, so you have like it's time for salat al-dhuhr, or maybe before that it's time for salat al-duha, right? So something that is permissible, something that is recommended, that is mustahab or sunnah, or something that is obligatory or faridah, like dhuhr or one of the 5 pairs. The second is the inability to use water. So what does that mean? Including the absence of water, its price being too expensive. If it's too expensive to buy, and you can barely buy enough to drink, then you don't use it for wudu. So if it's too expensive, or if it's much higher than normal, meaning the water is just much more expensive than it usually is, then you don't have to use it. Not being able to afford the price, fear that using or seeking water will result in harm to one's body, one's friends, or to someone in one's charge, wife or relatives, or fearing harm to one's property or livestock from thirst, sickness, destruction, or the likings, fearing that using it will delay recovery or cause a blemish to remain. So if there's any form of harm that's going to come from using water, then you can do tayammum. So if any form of harm. So if you're like, I have a wound and I can't risk having water close on my, then you can use wudu. Use tayammum. And tayammum is very simple. Tayammum is you have I think he talks about it. Yeah, he does. Yeah, it'll be earth that is tahir, meaning that no one has urinated on, there's no najasa on it, and it can't be mud. It should be clean soil or light soil, and you hit your hands on it, and then you wipe your face. And you wipe. It's a very simple action, and doesn't really risk anything. So if there's any harm of using water to yourself, to someone else, fear of thirst for somebody. Yeah, I will, inshallah. Once we come to it, I'll show you. We'll use, because you can technically even use the sujad. Maybe not this one, or maybe even this one. It's been here for 2 years. It probably hasn't. Yeah, we should probably rip this out and get something new. But is it something that has any form of airborne dust in it? It should suffice, inshallah ta'ala. But the idea here, what I think is important, is that if there's any form of harm that's going to occur to people or to people under your charge, or if the water is not is going to harm you physically, or there's the lack of it is going to cause thirst or destruction, then you're permitted to go to dry ablution in those situations. Okay, so it's 9:38. Khalas, haram. I'm tired too. So we'll stop there, inshallah ta'ala. So we didn't get to the end. How much is? All right, so it's going to go to the first week of August. That's fine. That's fine. That's all right. So next week, inshallah ta'ala, we'll conclude Bab al-Tahara, which is the first bab. I was hoping for it to be in 3 sessions. It can take 4. I'll do a bit of a review for you, and then we'll talk about the first assignment, inshallah, for this course. So what are we going to study in this text? We're going to study Tahara, and then Salah, and Siyam, Zakah, and Hajj. We'll study the 5 rituals. And then the second, if possible, we do a second part of this course, then we'll go through. This book is much longer, and it's a bit more technical and difficult to do. So I'm not sure. We may do a second part and go over some of the mawarith and some of the mu'amalat and stuff like that. But I'm trying to get through at least the rituals for you, at least in this first part of the course. Until hopefully, I was hoping to finish at the end of July, so we may have to go like an extra week into August, but that shouldn't be a problem, inshallah. Jazakumullah khair, subhanaka wa bihamdika, la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk. Wa sallallahu wa sallam wa baraka ala nabiyyina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Jazakumullah khair, barakallahu fikum. Please do use the material that exists in the classroom. There's extra reading. Fiqh is based on you have to read. This is not enough. Like this 1 hour that we share, it's not going to go very far with you. You have to read a little bit. So there's extra reading in Arabic, there's extra reading in English. Take the time and read a little bit around the topics that we're talking about, and then you feel free to ask me if you have any questions regarding them, but that will help solidify some of this information and make you more comfortable with some of these concepts, inshallah. I can do this. Is it recording? Okay. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillahi rabbil alamin. Allahumma salli wa sallim wa barik ala nabiyyina Muhammad wa sahbihi ajma'in. So this is the third session, inshallah, of the Fiqh Hanbali course, and today I'm going to attempt to try and maybe come to the end of the chapter of purification, which is a little bit of an ambitious hope. I don't think I will. There's just too many slides to get there, but I think we're still doing reasonable time, inshallah ta'ala. We'll be done by the mid towards or end of July, inshallah ta'ala, towards the end of July, inshallah ta'ala. So we'll continue from today. We start from wasifatul wudu. Yeah, this is the slide that wasn't possible to read. Oh, I don't know why it looks so bad. Very, very poor resolution. All right, I'll try. Anyways, okay. So we'll start. يقول المصنف رحمه الله ونفعنا بعلمه وصفة الوضوء. And maybe turn the camera a little bit over here, so that I can read it, because I'm too far away to read it. When I'm standing over here, I can't read it. وصفة الوضوء أن ينوي ثم يسمي ويغسل كفيه ثلاثا ثم يتمضمض ويستنشق ويغسل وجهه من منابت الشعر الرأس إلى من حدر من اللحيين والذقن طولا من الأذن إلى الأذن عرضا وما فيه من شعر خفيف ظاهر الكثيف مع ما استرسل منه ثم يديه مع المرفقين ثم يمسح كل رأسه مع الأذنين مرة واحدة ثم يغسل رجليه مع الكعبين ويغسل الأقطع بقية المفروض فإن قطع من المفصل غسل رأس العضد منه ثم يرفع نظره إلى السماء ويقول ما ورد. So here he just explains what the صفة الوضوء, how wudu is done, and what we did last week. Can you make it respond to my? There you go. Backwards. Not listening to me. All right, there we are. So we talked about niyyah as the condition. And we talked about furud al-wudu. So we talked about the obligatory acts of wudu. And this is an important slide for you within this course, is to know within the fiqh, in any madhab, knowing what the obligatory actions within the rituals is important. Whatever madhab you're studying, you should know what furud wudu is. So the six that he pointed out here, rahimahullah, is what I want you to make sure you're very clear on. Washing the face, including mouth and nose, washing the forearms, wiping all of the head, washing the feet, maintaining the above order, and maintaining continuity. There are differences of opinion in other madhab, but this is for you. If you're learning fiqh, you learn one madhab, and you stick to it, and you just follow, make sure that your rituals are following. And if you use a towel in the middle of your wudu, you should be fine. I kind of went back and just reviewed maybe different opinions on the matter, because it's artificial. So what they were talking about here is if it naturally, if you leave it long enough for it naturally to become dry, then that's what they're pointing out. But if you artificially dry your arm and then continue, then that's acceptable. So that's just to answer your question from last week. So he talks about how he thinks people should do wudu. This is unbearably slow. Guilty. Okay, I'll point it that way then. Maybe keep that open because the thing is over there. So he describes how to make a complete ablution or order. So number one, you make an intention. Number two, you say Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Number three, you wash the hands 3 times. And number four, rinse the mouth and nostrils 3 times each, which is madmada and istinshaq. You can do it with the same amount of water. You can pick up water and go into the mouth and into the nostrils, into the mouth, into the nostrils, into the mouth, into the nostrils, and that should suffice. Now you could do with separate scoops of water as well, if you like, but 1 scoop should suffice for both. One of them wash the face 3 times. Its limits are from the hairline to underneath the jawbone. All right, so from the hairline to the jawbone. So regardless of where your hairline begins. Now, if someone is bald, then whatever their hairline was before they went bald, and it's usually people can see till right under the jawbone. That is obligatory. And the lihya, of course, is a sunnah, as we pointed out last time. So if you don't do the full lihya, that's fine, but you get at least as much of the face as possible to the jawbone. Including the chin lengthwise and from ear to ear widthwise. So from ear to ear. including as far as hair and the outer surface of thick hair as far as it descends. So if there's any hair on either side, all that is included within dipping. One then washes the head, hands up to and including the elbows and fingernails 3 times. Light grime under the fingernails and the like are harmless. Then one wipes the entire head, including the ears, 1 time. So it's in the entire head for the Hanabila. So if you're learning Fiqh Hanbali with me, then you'll be wiping all of your head, right? Just you take 1 scoop of water, you wipe the whole head from front to back or from back to front. Doesn't make a difference. From front to back is more what people do, and then just it's 1 wipe. For the Shafi'i, you don't need the full head. The obligatory is just 1 part of the head. The sunnah is the full head, right? So it's a little bit different between the 2 schools of jurisprudence. Then one wipes the entire head, including the ears, 1 time. One then washes the feet, including the ankles, 3 times. And of course, he's not talking about, he's saying is how to do wudu in general, and he's not specifying what is fard obligatory out of this and what is sunnah, because he already talked about what was fard last week. Like he pointed the 6 pieces out. Now he's telling you, now that you know what you have to do and what you should do, here's how you should do wudu in general. Just do wudu in this manner. It's more of a teaching point in terms of how to do it. As someone with an amputated limb washes the remaining essential portion of a cut limb, if the amputation is at the elbow joint, one washes the end of the upper arm, the humerus. Similarly, if the amputation is at the ankle joint, one washes the end of the shin or the skin. So if someone's amputated, then they just they wash the last piece of the amputation. If it's elbow or above, same thing if it's ankle or above. Then one raises the gaze to the sky and says what was narrated. So it was narrated, أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وأن محمدا عبده ورسوله. And then there's the dua that they put here. And there's difference of opinion on the authenticity of dua. But this is what you should say after. What's authentic is you أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وأن محمدا عبده ورسوله. Yeah. No, you don't have to breathe it. No, it's about cleansing the nostrils. So do whatever you need to do to cleanse them. Some people are more capable of breathing that in, and some people aren't. So it doesn't really make a difference. It's just it really comes down to what you're used to doing. All right. وتباح معونته وتنشيف أعضائه. It is permissible to assist someone in performing ablution. And it's also permissible to dry one's limbs after ablution. And this is the reason that he's saying it's permissible is because there are narrations that pointed out the Prophet ﷺ would rarely dry his limbs after wudu. And there are some weak narrations where he told someone not to. The context was unclear. But it's permissible for you to do that after you're done your wudu. And it's permissible for someone to help you do wudu. Yudlik, and to actually, meaning if you're not capable, someone can actually take the water and go over your limbs for you if you're elderly or sick. No, you don't. No, you don't. It's sunnah to have wudu if it's that for someone else, but you don't have to. All right, bab mash al-khuffayn. So wiping over foot gear, khuf, and other barriers, bandages and headgear. Is a dispensation, which is what we call a rukhsa, is severe to washing one's feet. Wiping over them lifts ritual purity. However, it is not recommended to wear such barriers simply for the sake of wiping. So he just added some pieces here that I think are reasonable. A rukhsa, which is when you're offered a means for ease. That's what a rukhsa means. I mean, something's difficult, and a rukhsa is offering you some ease. So it is recommended to take a rukhsa when a rukhsa is available to you as a Muslim. But you're well within your rights not to, if you don't want to. If you want to do something that's a little bit more strict or difficult for your own self, for your own spiritual growth, or for what, then that's fine. No one can say no to you. Like if, for example, you have a rukhsa when you're traveling to break your fasting, and you're like, I don't want to break my fasting, I feel fine, then you're allowed to do that. You're not forced to break your fasting. You're not told that what you're doing is wrong. Unless fasting is going to affect your functionality and cause you to be a burden on others, or cause you to make mistakes, or not to do your job appropriately, then you should take that rukhsa. But that's just like that's an usul fiqh issue, but just kind of point that out. So يجوز يوما وليلة ولمسافر 3 بلياليها ومن حدث بعد لبس على طاهر مباح ساتر للمفروض يثبت بنفسه من خف وجورب صفيق ونحوهما وعلى عمامة لرجل محنكة أو ذات ذؤابة وعلى خمر نساء مدارة تحت حلوقهن في حدث أصغر وجبيرة لم تتجاوز قدر الحاجة ولو في أكبر إلى حلها إذا لبس ذلك بعد كمال الطهارة. There's a couple of points here that are really important for us to talk about, inshallah ta'ala. So, it is permissible to wipe over foot gear that is pure, lawful, and that covers the portion obligatory to washing during ablution, and that attaches to the feet on its own for a duration of 24 hours for a resident or a traveler who is not permitted to shorten prayers, and 72 hours for a traveler who is permitted to shorten prayers. So, the khuf, we've talked about this before. A khuf is usually a leather sock. That's what a khuf is. It's a leather sock. And in order for it to be something that you can wipe upon, then it has to cover what you have to wash from your feet. So it has to go above the ankle. So anything that's under the ankle does not, and these weird looking socks these days that kind of are under the ankle, they don't work. Like they don't suffice at all. And there can be no holes in this foot gear that you are wearing. But the khuf is usually a leather jacket, a leather sock, and these leather socks are not water does not go through them, right? So they're waterproof because they're leather. So here, what he points out here is one can also wipe over thick socks and the like. وَجَوْرَبٍ صَفِيقٍ. So this I put it right. So this is the only madhab out of the four that has this terminology, right? All four do not have that in it. If you go to any of the four and you study, they don't have that wording. It's only khuf, it's only a leather sock. It has to be something that is waterproof. The only madhab that allows for something that it may not be fully waterproof is Imam Ahmad's madhab. He added wajawra bin safiq. And the reason he did is because there's a hadith that he saw to be reasonable in terms of authenticity, and he has evidence of certain tabi'een that did it. So he put that evidence together, and he felt it was sufficient to say that this was acceptable. But the other three madhab do not see that. All right, I think it's a very reasonable rukhsa to take. I think it's reasonable to follow this. But I'm just saying that if you're asked or if this comes up, it's a part of the Hanbali madhab. It's not a part of any of the other three madhab. And you can also wipe over, and I'll explain what the wiping system in a moment for you, inshallah. A man's turban that loops under the neck or possesses tails. So men can wipe upon their turbans instead of their hair if their turbans are amongst the type that they loop around. These are very hard to take off. These take a lot of work to take off, and if they have tails, I mean, taking them off is going to ruin the whole turban. And usually, people who wear those turbans are doing it for reasons of war, battle, or work. So you can wipe over a turban, and a woman's head covering that wraps under her neck. So a lady who's wearing a hijab that is also wrapping under her neck, then she can wipe upon it instead of wiping upon her hair. This is also in the Hanbali madhab, and not all of them agree with that, but I think it's a really good rukhsa for people to take from this madhab because it makes life easier for them. If it's a loose hijab, then no. If it's a tight one and the hijab goes under the neck, so taking it off is actually a lot of work, just like the turban would be, then you can just wipe on top of the headgear. Wiping over the aforementioned applies only for minor ritual impurity. Obviously, if you have a hadath akbar, if you have and you had intercourse, or you have janaba, then or if she was ha'id or menstruating or nifas, then that doesn't occur, but that doesn't apply. But if you're just trying to make wudu from hadath asghar, from a minor ritual impurity, then this applies. One can wipe over a bandage even in the case of major ritual impurity, as long as it does not cover more than what is needed. Meaning you're wearing a cast for a broken arm or a broken leg or broken something, or maybe an injury of some sort. As long as the cast is not covering parts of your body uselessly, they're just right for no reason, which they don't do that anyways. But that's what he's saying. Just make sure that it's not your whole body isn't covered in a bandage just for the sake of doing that. Then that's fine. As long as it's not covered more than needed. The injury or break and nearby areas needed for fasting the bandages. Wiping over bandages is the dispensation that even sinners can take, and their removal provided they are worn after the completion of ritual purification. So this piece here at the end, I'm going to talk about in a separate slide, because this is no longer what the scholars of the Hanbali madhab see. It was the prominent position within the Hanbali madhab when Imam Hajjawi wrote this text. It's not the prominent position of any madhab today. Almost all four madhab don't ask for this as a condition. I mean, they don't ask for the condition of the cast being worn with tahara. This is something that's been reviewed or revised by scholars. Now, there's a lot of opinions, by the way, that have been revised by the scholars within the madhab over the last 50 years, and they will be incorporated into new text as kind of time progresses, for sure. So the idea here is if you want to make wudu, and you make wudu in the morning or before you go, you wear your socks, and you leave. Now, if you want to make wudu, you are allowed to wipe upon your footgear. And if you're wearing an amama with an underlying wrap, or you're wearing a hijab with an underlying wrap, then you can wipe upon that instead of taking it off and wiping it over your head. Now, for the khuf specifically, and then for the bandages or casts, it's the same thing. You wipe on top of it if it's covering a part that needs wudu. If you have a bandage up here, it makes no difference because it's not a part of wudu. It has to be something down here. If it's up here, it doesn't matter either. So we're talking about if you have a bandage over a part of your body that requires cleaning or washing during wudu. ومن مسح في سفر ثم أقام أو عكس أو شك في ابتدائه فمسح مقيم وإن أحدث ثم سافر قبل مسحه فمسح مسافر. So one wipes like a resident. If one A wiped while traveling and then became a resident, or B wiped while a resident and then became a traveler, or is unsure about its start date, whether one began wiping as a resident or traveler. So if you start your day as got it for Fajr, you made your wudu, you put on your socks, you made wudu and wiped for Dhuhr, and then you traveled. You're not permitted 72 hours. You're permitted in the Hanbali madhab only that day. Right? Then during your travels, if you make a full wudu and you start, you have 72 hours to wipe after that. So as long as you start as long as you do the full wudu and then wear the socks during travel, then you're permitted the 72 hours. If you do the full wudu and wear your socks and you're still a resident with no intention of traveling, if you have the intention of traveling, if you're like, I'm leaving today, so I'm going to wake up in the morning, make wudu, wear my socks, and leave, that you get 72 hours for doing that. But I'm saying if you didn't have the intention of traveling altogether that day, so the intention was as a resident, then you continue as a resident. Just traveling does not change that for the Hanabila. It's not like that for the Shafi'iyya or the Hanafiya. And they allow you to do to break that rule. But for the Hanabila, that's how it is. Or if you wiped as while traveling and then became a resident. So meaning you're traveling. You started wiping during your travel, so you have 72 hours, and then but your travel finished in 24 hours, right? So at that point, khalas, you have to take it off because you don't get 72 hours anymore. You only get the 20. You're now a resident, so you only get the 24 hours. Then that was done, so you have to, and that's usually what people do because people rarely come home and keep on wiping over their socks to begin with. But I'm just saying, in case that's in case something like that happens, this is the ruling. So these are the two conditions or the two situations where you wipe as a resident. If you're traveling and then become a resident, so you just get 24 hours, or you wipe as a resident and then become a traveler, you get 24 hours. If you wipe during travel or with the intention of traveling or at the beginning of travel, then you get 72 hours to do it. If one is ritually impure while resident and then travels before actually wiping over footgear or the like, one wipes over them as a traveler since the wiping began when one was a traveler. So I made wudu in the morning, and then I wore my socks, and then I traveled. So I get to wipe for 72 hours because I haven't done anything yet. Like I just made wudu and put my socks on, right? I haven't wiped yet. So the first wiping over my socks happened during travel, so I get 72 hours. If the first wipe over my socks happened during residency, where I'm staying, then I only get 24. That make sense? Let's just kind of know how you do it. So if you want to wipe for 72 hours during travel, then make sure you make wudu, a full wudu, before you start your travel. Just before you start traveling, then when you're starting, then you're good. If you're wiping throughout the day, for example, you wipe before Dhuhr, wipe before Asr, then you traveled at Maghrib, right? You only get to wipe until Isha, even if you may be traveling for 6 days, right? Because you started wiping when you were a resident staying in your city. But once you make a full wudu during travel, you get 72 hours after that to do it. Okay? But if you made a full wudu and then put your socks on and didn't wipe, let's say you didn't wipe all day, you held your wudu and then start to travel, and the first wipe happened during your travel, then you have 72 hours. Continue to do that. All right. Oh, that was two. Yeah. So there's a fatwa that Azhar gave out maybe roughly 10 years ago, where they allowed wiping over shoes, but they had conditions of the shoes being difficult to get off. So people who are construction workers, people who wear the shoes are like their boots and they're really hard to get. Taking them off, this is an hour. This is an hour of taking this off. And they offered similar fatwa for physicians who are trying, like may be wearing certain, taking it all off and putting back all again, especially during COVID. So they offered them certain. So I think certain exemptions. So I think for the fatwa for wiping over the shoes with that condition is acceptable. Outside of that, I don't think it is. Like if you're wearing just regular shoes, no, I think you can pull them out and you can do a wipe over the jawarib and then slip it back in. But people are wearing construction boots or in sites, working sites where it's hard to take them off. It's actually a big deal. Then I think it's a reasonable thing to do. So wiping over bandages, the cast does not have to be worn after purity for it to be wiped over for ablution. This is the opinion of the Hanafis, Malikis, and opinion within the Shafi'i school, and opinion narrated from Imam Ahmad. So all four schools have this opinion within it, and all modern scholars today, this is what they say. There is no need for a dry ablution or repeating prayers, because this is something that the Imam within this text will talk about a lot. Because if you don't have wudu before you had the bandage on, then he goes into this long explanation. I don't require you to know it or understand it, because it's just I don't think it's not a part of the prominent position of the madhab anymore, or any of the other madhab for that matter. ولا يمسح قلانس. Is this? Okay. ولا يمسح قلانس ولفافة ولا ما يسقط من القدم أو يرى منه بعضه. So one does not wipe over hats, cloth wrapped around the foot to keep it warm, for example, something that does not stay on the foot or something that reveals part of the foot. So it has to be a proper sock. That if you leave it, it stays on the foot and it's covering the whole foot, and there's no holes in it. You can't see the foot through it, something like that. So it has to be a jawrab safiq. It has to be a reasonably thick sock. So none of this. Some socks I see, like they're not thick enough, but most socks, these are fine. Yeah. No, you can pair your shoes. You can totally pair your shoes, and we'll talk about that inshallah. The opinion for that will come up very soon. فإن لبس خفا على خف قبل الحدث فالحكم للفوقاني. If one leather sock was worn over another before losing one's ritual purity, the rule applied to the top sock. So if for some reason someone made wudu and then wore two leather socks, then the rule applies for the top leather sock. All right. Why someone would do that, I don't know. Maybe for if it's really cold or you're in certain conditions, you need two socks, and it applies for the top sock. Once you take off the top sock, that's it. So ويمسح أكثر العمامة وظاهر قدم الخف من أصابعه إلى ساقه دون أسفله وعقبه وعلى جميع الجبيرة. So one must wipe the majority of a turban. So if we're saying someone who's wearing a turban, right, that it goes around, that loops around the neck or has a tail, then you wipe the majority of the turban. The khuf, you wipe from the top of the foot, from the ankle, from the toes to the ankle, right? So you can go backwards, you can go forwards. It doesn't make a difference. You don't wipe under the foot ever. For when you're doing the masah al-khuf, you always wipe on top of the foot, from the toes back to the ankle, or from the ankle down to the toes. And you wipe the entirety of the cast, as long as it doesn't ruin it. Then you get the entirety of the cast. What you do, yeah. No, one at a time is fine. Yeah, you don't have to do the same, as you would make wudu. So this is a table that the sheikh put for wiping over the bandage. And the reason that he put this here, I just put this here not so you can study, so you can understand how confusing it was beforehand. Because the reason that it looks like this is because before they would look at this wiping over a bandage. For it to be acceptable, you needed to have worn it with wudu, right? So this shart, when this condition was dropped, the Hanafis, Malikis never had it. The Shafi'i, Imam Muzani does not see it, and his opinion on this matter has been more what people have been taking in the Shafi'i world, and the same thing, the Hanabiya changed their opinion. But before that, this is what you needed. This is a very confusing and difficult table. So I just left it there for you to look at. Don't attempt to memorize it or anything, but you're welcome to read it and attempt to understand it if you want. So ومتى ظهر بعض محل الفرض بعد الحدث أو تمت مدته استأتم الطهارة. When part of what is essential to wash becomes visible, or his duration expires, one will need to renew his purification. So meaning, if you're wiping over the bandage and for wudu, and then you're praying, and then you're wiping again and praying, and then the bandage comes off, even if you had made wudu before, make a wudu again, right? So even if you had made wudu, for something, once the bandage comes off, you make wudu, make a full wudu after that. It's like someone who's finished. If you entered Islam or you finished your menstruation, then you make a ghusl, or you go. So the same thing. Once the bandage comes off, you make a proper wudu, even if you had made wudu before and you were considered to be ritually pure at that moment. But once it comes off, you make a full wudu. All right. So we'll talk about nawaqid al-wudu. So ablution invalidators is what takes away or ruins your. Yes. Band-Aid, then you can just wipe over the Band-Aid. Like Band-Aids usually aren't ruined. Band-Aids are ruined if you like put a lot of water on them, but a wipe over the Band-Aid is not a problem. And again, if you can't wipe over if it's not waterproof and it's going to get water to the wound, then you just work around it. Like if what's under the Band-Aid is you don't want water cannot touch it, then you put something on that is heavier, that is waterproof, and you wipe over that because you don't want water going into the wound. So you have to know what it is, what type of wound you have to do. So ينقض ما خرج من سبيل وخارج من بقية البدن إن كان بولا أو غائطا أو كثيرا نجسا غيرهما. وزوال العقل إلا يسير نوم من قاعد وقائم ومس ذكر متصل أو قبل بظهر كفه أو بطنه ولمسهما من خنثى مشكل ولمس ذكر ذكره أو أنثى قبلها لشهوة فيهما ومسه امرأة بشهوة أو تمسه بها ومس حلقة الدبر لا مس شعر وظفر وأمردة ولا مع حائل ولا ملوس بدنه ولو وجد منه شهوة. So this goes into some degree of detail regarding what causes you to lose wudu, and I'll explain them to you, inshallah. So there are 8 things that he points out here as invalidators. Now, if you go to the Shafi'i madhab, they're much less than that, but here he goes into a few more details that maybe the Shafi'is didn't go to in their basic or their primary texts. So anything that exiting from a waste passage, even if rare or pure, like a bloodless birth. So anything that comes out of the waste passages is going to be considered a naqid lil wudu, even if what's coming out is pure, like sperm, for example. Then it's still naqid lil wudu, if not more. But you're going to lose your ritual impurity. When we say naqid lil wudu, we're saying losing ritual impurity. Ritual purity is what we're saying here. So the first one is anything exiting from the waste passage, regardless of what it is. Any amount of urine or feces or large amounts of another impure substance, vomit, for example, exiting from the rest of the body. So this includes if someone has a conduit, or if someone vomits in vomiting. All of this will cause you to lose your wudu for the Hanbali madhab. Now, someone who has a chronic condition where they have basically an ileal conduit for urine, or maybe a pouch for feces because they had a colectomy of some sort. So someone who has it as an ongoing condition and there's no way to seal it, then this person just makes wudu and prays, but has to make wudu for every prayer. Okay, they can't just hold on to wudu for a long period of time. So someone who has a sack for urine or a sack for feces, this person has to make wudu for every prayer. They can't hold their wudu for prayer after prayer just based on the fact that they're not letting out gas, or they're able to hold that. That doesn't make a difference because they have ongoing waste coming out of their bodies. Okay, losing consciousness, except for light dozing while seated or standing. So the Shafi'is and the Hanbalis, they have something called jalsat al-mutamakkin. So if I'm sitting down like this and I fall asleep and I wake up, then I haven't lost my wudu, right? But it has to be a short period of time, like less than an hour. Because most likely, if you sit like this, for 3-4 hours, you're probably not going to be able to sit like this for 3-4 hours. It's impossible. So if you doze off sitting, you can't have your back to a wall. You can't be reclining on anything. You have to be sitting where you're basically depending on your seat. Right? You're depending on your pelvis to sit down. And if you fall asleep like this, then you don't lose your wudu. This is for the majority of the madhab. The Hanabila also have within their madhab that if you're standing up and you fall asleep standing up and you wake up for a short period of time, that you don't lose your wudu too, which is an extra piece they have in their madhab that you don't find in the other ones. And the reasoning behind these things is that if you're standing or sitting in these positions, it's difficult to lose your wudu. It's difficult because the way your body, like if you're falling asleep standing up, then the only reason you're standing up is because your muscles are still tense, and the tension in your muscles will not allow you to let go of gas. The same thing when you're sitting down. You're sitting down and you're able to sit up straight with not reclining on anything. Then usually it's because you're seated perfectly in a way where you're not going to let out any gas. And if it's for a short period of time, this is an exemption. So if you fell asleep for an hour, you wake up, you lost your wudu. And if you're like, oh, I only slept for an hour, it doesn't matter. If you're lying down, you fell asleep, you lost your wudu, even if it's like a minute. But if you're sitting up straight and you fell asleep, or you're standing and you fell asleep, then in a short period of time, then that does not count and your wudu is still valid. Touching a male's genitalia or a female's genitalia with the back of the palm or the edges of one hand, or any form of genitalia, whether it's even for a hermaphrodite or a male or female touching their own genitals with the intention of arousal, all of this for the Hanbalis causes you to lose your wudu. So it's touching others or touching your own, meaning your spouse or your children, touching your own, then this causes you to lose. So a male touching a woman's skin or her touching his skin with the intention of arousal. So the Shafi'is don't have that condition. If you remember what we studied a year ago or more, they don't have that condition, meaning it doesn't have to be with the intention of shahwa. Two spouses, then there's no shahwa. They touch, then they have to make wudu again. But if there's shahwa, for the Hanabila, if there's no shahwa, then it doesn't count. But if there is, it was done in a way where they were trying to cause arousal, then they lose their wudu. And then touching the anus. So these are the different reasons for why you would lose your wudu. So ablution is not invalidated by touching the hair or fingernails or tooth, whether his or woman's, nor if one is touched by the aforementioned, or by a man touching a pubescent male, even with desire, or when touching occur over a barrier, or if someone's body is touched by a male or female, even if one feels aroused by it. Likewise, being touched on the genitals does not invalidate ablution. So let me explain that for a moment. So touching hair and touching fingernails, even if there's shahwa, doesn't cause people to lose their wudu. I mean, this is between man and woman. And as weird as this sounds, they do point this out. So if a man touched a young person with shahwa who's not a female, if it's a young male, they don't lose their wudu. Now that's haram to be done, and this is talked about in other parts of the matan. But when fiqh is very technical, fiqh is not interested in why would they do that and this is horrible and they shouldn't do it. Fiqh is here to talk about whether you lose your wudu or you don't lose your wudu in general. And it's not interested in whether this is correct or not correct. They'll talk about whether it's ethically acceptable or not in a different part of the matan, and it's obviously haram and it's punishable. But it doesn't cause a person to lose their wudu, right? And it's just something that's important to understand. All right. وتنقض غسل ميت وأكل اللحم خاصة من الجزور. Ablution is also invalidated by number 1 washing, number 6 washing the deceased, and eating camel meat. So washing deceased is agreed upon. So if you're washing a mayyit, then you have to make wudu afterwards because that's yanqud wudu'ak. And the 7th one he points out here is eating camel meat, and that's specific to the Hanbali madhab. Only the Hanabila see this. No one else does. And Imam Ahmad has an argument here. He has an argument of a few hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, where he told people to make wudu after he ate camel meat. His interpretation of it is that because it's camel meat. The other scholars' interpretation is because he smelled something, because he knew someone had done something. So instead of telling the person to go make wudu, he told everyone to make wudu just to save this person the embarrassment of making wudu after he stinked up the room. So it was just it's based on interpretation of certain evidence, and that was not his only argument. He has arguments of certain tabi'in also doing this. So that was his opinion on the matter. That eating camel meat, you need to do wudu after it. It breaks your wudu. But it's only his madhab that sees that. وَكُلُّ مَا أَوْجَبَ غُسْلًا أَوْجَبَ وُضُوءًا إِلَى الْمَوْتِ. Anything that requires a purificatory bath also requires an ablution except for death. When someone dies, they don't need a wudu. They get purificatory ghusl. You get the ghusl for the mayyit, right? But they don't have to have wudu after that. But everything that requires a ghusl, so intercourse and hayd and nifas, they all require wudu as well. But because ghusl makes up for wudu, then that suffices. But if meaning just like letting gas out makes you lose your wudu, menstruation makes you lose your wudu, nifas makes you lose your wudu, and intercourse makes you lose your wudu as well. But he just said anything that requires a purificatory ghusl also makes you lose your wudu as well, and that's kind of goes without being said, is by default. Yeah. So as long as you don't, if you're not touching with your hand, then you're fine. But touching genitalia, even of children, causes you to lose your wudu. You should make your wudu. Again, that's for the Hanabila. It's fine. Yeah. Using a Kleenex is fine. Yeah. 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 No, just wudu. Sunnah ghusl. Sunnah to have a ghusl. But it's enough for him to make wudu. No, we don't. I think we'll talk about this. If not, but no, you don't. If you make the intention, so whatever. So the way they look at it is that you have minor and major ritual impurities. So whatever removes the major removes the minor. So a ghusl that removes the major ritual impurity removes the minor ritual impurity by default as well, with some difference of opinion within the Shafi'i madhab. We talked about this when we did the Shafi'i course. But for them, for the Hanabila, it works easily. ومن تيقن الطهارة أو شك في الحدث أو بالعكس بنى على اليقين فإن تيقنهما وجهل السابق فهو بصد حاله قبلهما. All right. So whoever is certain that they had ritual purity but doubts that it became invalidated, or vice versa, bases their action upon certainty. We talked about this before. We talked about water just before. You always go by certainty. So if you're like, I can't remember if I made wudu or not, then you didn't. Can't remember if I lost my wudu or not, then you didn't. Right? So if you can't remember if you lost it, then you have it. If you can't remember if you made wudu, then you don't have it. So you just go by what you're not sure, what you're sure of, and not what you're not sure of. Now, if one is certain that he has been in both states but does not know which was prior. So you remember making a wudu and you remember losing it. Just can't remember which one happened first. All right? Then it is the opposite of the state that preceded the two if he knows what it was. Thus, if he is certain of having ritual purity prior to the two, he is now ritually impure. And if he is certain of having ritual impurity prior to the two, he is now ritually pure. This is very confusing because the way he puts it. So you remember wudu and you remember hadath. You can't remember which happened first. You remember what was before that. If you remember before that, you had a wudu earlier in the day, then you consider yourself not having wudu right now. You go by the opposite. And if you remember earlier in the day not having wudu or losing your wudu, then you consider yourself having wudu. It's just the way that they look at this is that you clump up the two actions that are similar. So if you remember two things, wudu and no wudu, like hadath and wudu, and you can't remember which one came first, what's before that? Just go by the opposite of it. Clump up the two that are the same, and then go by the opposite. So if you remember no, it was wudu, then you clump up the two wudus together and go as if you didn't have one. I remember ritual impurity, and then clump up the impurity with that, and then go with wudu after it. That's his opinion on this issue. It's very rare for you to remember two things. You can't remember which one happened first. And if you want to be safe, obviously you just make wudu. But this is the fatwa that they give. So he explains it here a little bit, but here's what he says. So thus, if he is certain of having ritual, so we talk about this. This is because he is certain of the first state turning into its opposite, and doubts its opposite remaining until now. And the default is that it remains. If he is uncertain as to which state was first, ablution is necessary. If you just don't know what came first, then you just go by ablution. But the idea is if you're not sure, just go by the opposite of what you think occurred at the beginning, because you know that you flipped it at some point. You just know that you flipped it. That's his reasoning on this issue. What we usually tell people is whatever you're uncertain of, just go by what you're certain of. And if you're uncertain of both, you just go make wudu again. Make your wudu again if you're uncertain by both. This is a bit complicated. I never fully understood why he decided to go in this. ويحرم على المحدث مس المصحف والصلاة والطواف. It is unlawful for someone in the state of minor ritual impurity to touch the written Quran, the mushaf, pray, or perform circumambulation. So salah and tawaf, this is understandable. Obviously, if you're muhdith, you can't do tawaf, you can't do salah. When it comes to touching the Quran, I talked about this obviously in the last. So and these are the slides from the Fiqh Shafi'i's course. Just I kind of put them here again. So the majority of scholars do not see it to be permissible to touch the Quran without purity. An opinion within the Shafi'i school, which is Imam al-Muzani's opinion, and some of the Malikis allow for it. The Hanbalis allow for it with a barrier. So if you don't have it, they're okay with you covering the mushaf with a barrier. Last 2 points only apply to minor ritual impurity, not for major. Holding the phone and reading the Quran from it is permissible. It's recommended to have purity when reciting the Quran at all times. So to get out of all this khilaf, you just read the Quran from your phone when you have any form of ritual impurity, whether it's minor or it's major, right? And it's just better to always have purity when you're reading the Quran in general. It's a good adab to carry. Like it's a good etiquette to always have when you're going to read the Quran, to have wudu prior to starting to read the Quran. Wallahu alam. But this is kind of, it just summarizes things for you a little bit. So major ritual impurity. Let's talk about ghusl. وموجبه خروج المني دفقا بلذة لا بدونها من غير نائم وإن انتقل ولم يخرج اغتسل له فإن خرج بعده لم يعده وتغيب حشفة أصلية في فرج أصلي قبل كان أو دبرا ولو من بهيمة أو ميت وإسلام كافر وموت وحيض ونفاس لا ولادة عارية من دم. So these are the 6 occasions where it's obligatory to have a ghusl, where you have to have a ghusl. So we talked about wudu. He talked about the sunnahs of wudu, talked about the obligatory actions of wudu, and he talked about the invalidators of wudu. He talked about masah al-khuffain. He talked about wiping over socks, headgear, footgear, and bandages. And now he's going to, and he talked about he talked about ghusl, which is major, what you need to do when you have a major ritual impurity. So number one, the release of ejaculate from someone who's awake, with it being in spurts and accompanied by pleasure. So it has to be pleasure attached to it, but not when these two are lacking. If one feels it move, but it does not exit, one must take a purificatory bath. If the sperm later exits, the purificatory bath is not repeated. So this may not be appropriate for all children, but for a male, if it's intercourse or without intercourse, and you feel there's something that moved and there was pleasure attached to it, this is ghusl. You have to have ghusl, even if nothing exited from your genitalia, nothing came out. And if later on something comes out, you don't have to repeat the ghusl again. And this may have some implications for people a bit older, who may have some surgeries in the past of some sort. So sometimes they can have intercourse with their spouses, and they know that something that they achieved the goal, but nothing actually comes out. Then they do ghusl. But if a few hours later or at night something comes out, it's not attached to any pleasure, it's just the move of fluid, then you don't have to repeat the ghusl. You do have to wash the area. You may have to do a wudu depending on the situation. So that's the first one. Second one. The insertion of the genitalia into opposite genitalia, or even into the anus, with or without ejaculation or ending, even into an animal or a dead being or someone asleep, insane or young but capable of intercourse, and likewise if a man's penis is inserted without his knowledge into any of the above while asleep. Again, a lot of these things are just based on scenarios and just based on giving as many different possibilities that exist out there. But in general, the moment the genitalia enters into the genitalia of the spouse or anywhere else, then ghusl is needed in any aspect of basically the woman or the spouse, or if it's not, which is obviously haram, but if it does happen, then it requires ghusl as well. And if something happens that is not permissible, obviously ethically or Islamically, but it did occur, then it still causes the need for ghusl. You can read the details there. They're self-explanatory, and I don't want to hurt your ears with hearing certain things. If a non-Muslim entering Islam, there's wajib al-ghusl. If someone's non-Muslim enters Islam, then it's wajib for them to have ghusl. Death for a non-martyr, if not a shaheed, the person who dies, is wajib to perform ghusl for them. Menstruation and hayd, meaning once it's done, you're going to require ghusl. Postpartum bleeding, which is nifas, unless it is bloodless childbirth. There's no difference of opinion that both of these require purification of bath, as stated in al-Mughni. And this is something that the flow of blood necessitates the purificatory bath, and is a cessation, is a condition for purificatory bath. So he says something here a little bit interesting. He says, "La wiladatun ariyatun min dam." He says, not a childbirth that has no blood in it, which I don't know what he means by. And when you read the modern, any of the Imam Buhuti's explanation of Zad al-Mustaqni', he doesn't really comment on it, because I'm not sure he understood what it meant either. Maybe they had noticed at some point certain types of births that didn't have blood. I don't know, like I never looked into into medical history to see if there was some type of this is something in OB-GYN world where a lady would give birth to something with no blood. But regardless, childbirth, postpartum bleeding, you're going to require a ghusl at the end of the duration. And maybe you can just ignore that piece here, because I don't know if we understand it. We'll cut for Maghrib inshallah and continue after.